What's up, guys? It's Bromley from Empire Barbell. Today we're going to talk about your coronavirus comeback. Now, gyms are starting to open back up. People are going out in droves to try and salvage what's left of their gains. The silver lining of all of this is that we're in a really good position to start back with good habits and get on the right foot so that we can build a wider base, reinforce technique, build up our work capacity, find some of that muscle that we lost over the last few months. In no time, we should all be able to get back to and even well beyond pre-coronavirus quarantine levels, but we just have to abide by a few key principles. Speaking of principles, the ones I'm about to lay out are going to be new to some of you. In fact, they get ignored by so many of you so often that it's hard for me not to see the events that have transpired that have led to the gym shutdowns as being some type of like nature mandated reset. It's as if the powers that be saw all of you winging your workouts, not writing things down, maxing every week and doing quarter squats and said, you know what, we had enough, we can't do it anymore. Just close the gyms, just put everyone in timeout. So we've all been given a second chance, so let's not waste it. You were all probably going hard in the paint every day before the quarantine. So although it might not feel like it, these few months off were a much needed reset. So rule number one of the coronavirus comeback is do not max out. For God's sakes, don't max out. Every single one of you is going to want to walk in the gym on day one and load up the bar with as much weight as you can handle, only to fail on a single that was probably a top set of 5 before the shutdown. And spare me that I need to reestablish a new Training Max Bull. I know you probably downloaded Wendler's updated Beyond Forever 531 Batman Tomorrow, but everything you do is going to be in the context of being very weak and atrophied and deconditioned, which means you are going to re-experience newbie gains. Everything is going to grow at such a rate that every 3 days, your training max is going to be pretty much irrelevant. Given the fact that we don't max every 3 days to figure out where our new baseline is, it stands to reason there's some better methods for figuring out if you've progressed or not. So we're starting right now in phase 1 of our divinely mandated periodization plan, and we never start phase 1 off going as hard as we can. Phase 1 is about base building. The key things that we need to train for are muscle mass, work capacity, and technical proficiency. And these are all things that going in and just hitting a top single does not do very well. Maximal work is reserved for 2 things. Thing 1 is as a test at the end of a fully fleshed out, fully realized training cycle, usually to figure out what your opening numbers are going to be for the next powerlifting meet. Now, none of you are on the back end of a fully fleshed out, fully realized training cycle because we've been quarantined for the last 3 months. And as far as I can tell, there aren't any powerlifting meets on the horizon. Thing 2 is to serve as a strength-specific training stimulus. And while that's valid, as a stimulus, maximal training falls short for many of you, namely because it doesn't do the things we need right now very well. Training maximally doesn't do a great job at building muscle very fast. It certainly doesn't increase your work capacity, and you can't really build technical proficiency with very, very heavy loads. It's also an unnecessarily complex mode of training. You can't train maximally on a weekly basis without incorporating some type of wizardry, and as best I can tell, most of you are still waiting your acceptance letter to Hogwarts. So if you waste your first training session and go max out today, what are you going to do next week? Are you just going to cross your fingers and hope that you can throw a little more pig iron on the bar? How long is that supposed to work for? I'm not a fan of the punish and pray method, and neither should you be. What I am a fan of is capitalizing on periods of time like this to get training in that's going to do the things we need. We want to aggressively check those boxes so that we can get more muscle, more endurance, and better technique faster to best set us up for those heavier phases down the road. Don't just beat yourself into the ground and cross your fingers that you're going to be stronger next week. You have to have a plan, because it's not the individual training session that gets you strong. It's the entire training block, and that's what we're looking at here. Thing number 2, stay light. Now this is very heavily tied into thing number 1, which is to not max out. We need to stay light, as I already explained. This is best going to suit the goals that we have right now. Linear models of periodization are brutally effective if you adhere to those principles. Starting out in the beginning phase, you're very deconditioned to volume, which means doing a few sets of 8, 10, 12 reps, it's going to leave you very sore, and you're going to progress in that rep range very fast. Remember, this is something you can always take into your training. You adapt to the rep range first. So by applying ourselves to these lighter rep ranges, you're going to adapt to the volume first, which means more work capacity, more muscle, better technical proficiency. Instead of running up to the heaviest weight that you can, stay around a weight that allows for crisp, deliberate, double-digit reps. It will burn and it won't be fun, but each set that you do is going to help refine your technique. It's going to help round out weak areas and make sure that when heavier attempts come down the road, you can stay tight and deliberate the entire time. You have to ask yourself, did your former pre-corona self suffer from ugly squats and deadlifts? Did you round your back when the weight got too heavy? Did your knees come in? Did you do that thing on bench press where when it got too heavy, one leg shot up and you turned sideways on the bench? If so, this is where you fix it. This is the phase where we start light enough to promote technical proficiency and to round out those weak areas. So by drilling in good motor patterns, by keeping a very rigid technical ceiling, we promote good habits. And over time, your body grows in the context of those good habits, which means weak areas are rounded out. This is my preferred method to actually specifically targeting weak points. Down the road, elite lifters tend to get weak points and they can be focused on specifically. But for most of you have weaknesses that are a byproduct of not adhering to a rigid technical ceiling, which is why we're staying light and focusing on that right now. The best fix for you is ultimately going to be staying light and putting in the work. It's also important to note that rep work is actually a lot easier to recover from. I'm not talking in the sense of delayed onset muscle soreness, but the global systemic recovery that's needed to execute a substantial workout within a certain period of time. Really heavy training can put your nervous system on the fritz for a week or more, which leads to these really confusing swings in performance. You feel good, you're not sore, but you wonder why after that last week's single felt so good, everything feels like garbage right now. High volume work doesn't have to be controlled so aggressively, which means you're giving yourself a bigger margin for error. That means you can spend more time just training and filling out your pattern of progression and less time really questioning every move you make, how every warm-up feels, whether or not you should push your workout back, whether or not you should deload. You need long periods of time where you can just train, and the beauty of rep work is that you can just run it indefinitely. As long as you're recovering from the soreness and as long as you're not actively overtraining, you can perform high rep workouts at a much more frequent pace. Number 3, do not jump ahead. You might think a 2-week prep period is plenty enough time to get you ready to start slinging heavy iron again, but it's not. Everything we just covered about base building takes time. And the thing is, the more time you spend in that threshold, the more you're going to be able to get out of it. Your goal actually isn't to jump through each phase of training as fast as possible. Your goal is to find a sustainable method of progression and milk it for all it's worth. If you can do that, you're going to leave each phase much better off. You're going to start each next phase at a higher level, which means you're going to get more out of it. So this waving, this ebbing and flowing between volume and intensity, or these different training thresholds, this is how we stack them together. If you pull it off right, you'll finish these 8 weeks or so higher than you were when you left off before the quarantine started, which means you're going to be starting the intensity phase at a much more elevated position. You're going to get a lot more out of it. And again, the bonus is the same deconditioning effect applies. The reason these next few weeks are going to be so productive for you is because you're deconditioned from work. So by being deconditioned, you're more sensitive to the stimulus, which means you're going to grow faster. Spending the next however many weeks not training heavy is going to leave you sensitive when you go back into that intensity phase, which means you are going to progress from the heavy weight faster. This is ultimately how we stack blocks of training together. The idea is we're training in one threshold while we're letting the other cool off. And if that threshold work is productive, then we actually go back into the other phase better than we were last time. We're resensitized to that stimulus, which means we continue to grow. So don't just blindly jump ahead to the heaviest phase as quickly as you can get there. Spend time in this threshold, understand how important this is for growth, and you'll be better off when you actually do get into a heavier phase. Thing number 4, do the things you hate. This is a big one. If we have any room to improve on past sins, it's going to be in actually doing the things that we hate doing, because we're all guilty of it. Pretty much every lifter has their series of movements that they really like, that they look forward to, and that they work very hard in, and then they tend to ignore everything else. It could be scapular work, it could be building up your rear delts, it could be working your rotator cuff, it could be flexibility, it could be doing stretches to try and maintain good movement ability as you build mass again so you don't get tight. It could be core work, getting your midsection strong, learning how to brace, getting those habits good now so that when you're ready for a big deadlift or squat, it's dialed in and you're ready to go and you don't have to second guess it. Many of you were probably suffering from chronic overuse issues or had lingering injuries that you were working through. Starting off on the right foot early in this phase where the movements are diverse and we're doing a lot more volume, it's a perfect opportunity to round out those old weak points so we don't keep committing the same bad habits. And then for all of you, there's the big one, and that is cardio. Yes, you need to do cardio. It helps with work capacity. You don't have to do a ton of it, but a cumulative weekly hour to 2 hours, it goes a long way. You can break it up however you want. Nobody ever lost gains for 20 minutes of work. That has never happened. If that was the case, we would all be celibate. You can do whatever you want. You can walk on an incline on the treadmill. You can use the elliptical or cycle. You can push the sled. Go for a hike. It doesn't matter. But get out, get your heart rate up. You'll live longer. You'll be healthier. You'll get through your workouts better. It's win-win-win. Not doing cardio does not make you a better lifter. So that's a big one. I want you guys to stop making excuses, get out there and start sweating. So I'm not one to lecture you about all the principles you should be following without giving you some more concrete advice. So I'm going to lay out really quickly a plan that you can apply to your few main lifts. It's going to set you up 6 to 8 weeks from now. You should be way better off than when you started. This is actually something that I started doing with a ton of success, and I'm going to share it with you guys right now. All right, so this progression is what I feel is a more intuitive way to start out a phase that we're in right now after a long layoff. We need to start light. We need to rebuild our base. So I like linear methods. The problem I have with a lot of them is that they start very high volume and go to very low volume. A linear progression just means that one variable moves linearly forward, like adding weight each week. That's a linear progression. Linear periodization, like classical periodization, it implies that as intensity goes up, volume comes down. So you always start, not just the block, but the first workout, typically with the highest volume workout. Now that never really made sense to me, because why would you do your highest volume workout when you are the least conditioned to volume? Why wouldn't you take time to build up that tolerance? And since I believe volume is such an important driver of force and progress, and it's so integral to building your base, that's exactly what we're going to do. Now, I didn't just make this up because it looks good on paper. I've been applying this to my bench for the last 6 weeks. I've actually written this in a lot of programs in the past and have had a lot of good success with it. This volumization, there might be some obscure definition that a Soviet came up with 60 years ago that I'm not aware of. I don't care to go find it. I say volumization because it's intuitive to me that we're talking about growing volume while also growing intensity marginally. I say intensification to mean something like linear periodization, where intensity is going up and then volume is going down, that inverse relationship. So where so many programs focus on just constant intensification, I tend to focus on volumization until it's time to peak, where I need to actually increase recovery. But for our normal training purposes, we don't need to increase recovery. We actually need to adapt to more stressful work, which is how we're going to plan this out. So conceptually, you're going to go in 3-week blocks. You could actually do 4-week blocks or even longer if a certain range is working for you. But there's an upper limit to how many sets you can add. I'm not going to have you guys go to 15 sets per workout in one lift. So what we're going to do is start with 3 sets. So each curve represents a week: week 1, week 2, week 3. So week 1 is 3 sets, week 2 is 4, week 3 is 5 sets. So we're going sets of 3. So we're going 3 sets, 4 sets, 5 sets, and then we're going to reset. Assume this is sets of 10 right here. What we're going to do is start at a baseline. Now the percentage doesn't matter. I wrote this to give you a conceptual idea of how I think of it. I call this baseline training. We start at baseline and we're just constantly improving. We never dip below the baseline. So for this 3-week mesocycle, we're going to go 60% as our baseline. It doesn't have to be 60%. It doesn't matter what it is. Use your best guess. About a 15 rep max, maybe even a 20 rep max, because even if you start too light, and you should err on the side of starting light, you're still adding sets each week, which is still going to be a very aggressive training stimulus. You're still going to adapt to that. So what we start out with is 3 sets across, 10 reps at 60%. Each week we're going to add a set, and we're going to increase our range a little bit. So we're going to go to 60 to 65. Now this is very helpful because it allows you to gauge based on how you feel each day. If you project a weight jump that isn't doable, you can always drop back down. It doesn't matter how you distribute your work across that range of percentages or across that weight threshold. The only thing that matters is that you don't dip below that baseline and that you try to increase marginally off what you did the week before. So week 3 is even a bigger range. Doing 5 sets of 10, that's very high volume, but at this point we're actually adapted to the volume. So what I then like to do is reset back to 3 at a different rep threshold. So now we're down to 3 by 8, and I move my baseline to the heaviest percentage from the block before. So 3 sets of 8 at 70% should be very doable. Again, the percentages don't matter. If you can do 1 or 2 sets of 10 at a given weight, there's no doubt in my mind you should be able to pull off 3 sets of 8. And then now we're working off 8s. We're not dipping below that baseline. We're adding a set each week, and we're trying to fill out into a higher threshold of weight. We're also driving intensity up. They shouldn't be big sweeping jumps. Err on the side of never missing a rep. You will negate a lot of the work that's done here. Just think of it as the slower you progress the intensity, the longer you can milk this, the better your results are going to be. That's ultimately how it works. So really easy way to run this coming back. You don't need to jump into 4, 5, 6 days of training. You can do a 3-day split, 2 upper body days, 1 lower body day. Starting out with these high reps, going straight into a lower body day, you might need a full week of recovery. If you start light enough and ease into it, you might be all right. If you're going to deadlift on that 4th day, I would cut the reps in half and leave the percentages the same. It's going to feel much easier, and that's okay, because your squat is going to be what drives the progress, and it's going to take time to adapt to that deadlift volume. But if you jump in trying to run 3 by 10 at around 60% on a deadlift, you're you're going to burn out really quick. I mean, that's just the way it is. It's going to make recovery very, very challenging. So I like to apply these type of volumization tactics to movements that are easier to recover from. You're looking at pressing, you're looking at squatting, rowing. Rowing's a good example. You could have a fourth day. It could be an upper back day. You could do some token deadlifts. Again, nothing heavy, and do a bunch of rowing, and you could follow a progression similar like this. I would also strongly recommend whatever accessory you put after, try to keep it at these weight thresholds. Don't follow this volumization program and then immediately after you bench, go and do like max pin presses or something. Let yourself adapt to this threshold. Hyper fixate on the threshold you're working on, and don't make jumps until you've completely exhausted it. Which for you guys, I mean, you should be able to run a template like this for 9, 12, 15 weeks if you wanted to. The longer you run it, the bigger you're going to get, the better you're going to be technically, the more you will get out of your training when you actually do get heavy. So just remember that. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions about this. If you have them, go ahead and leave them in the comment box, or go ahead and take them over to the forum, empire-forum.com, and I'll get to them there. Thanks for watching, guys. Until next time, this is Bromley Empire Barbell. I'll see you.